And thank you for joining us as we dive into electric vehicles, or EVs. We know that you are receiving lots of requests for webinars, but we want to let you know that we choosing us, and we appreciate that you're here today. My name is Julie Quinn, and joining me to facilitate today's webinar are Kelly Masacci and Sophia. This webinar is brought to you by Transaction Associates and on behalf of our Transportation Management Associations, or TMAs, and private clients. Transaction manages commuting programs and benefits and also has a shuttle service division. We're excited for you to hear from Anna Vanderspeck, from Electric Vehicle Program Director from Green Energy Consumer Alliance. Green Energy Consumer Alliance is a local nonprofit organization working to accelerate the transition of low carbon future. They have been running a program called Drive Green since 2016 that makes electric vehicles more affordable and accessible, and have helped over 800 people go to electric so far. We welcome your questions throughout the webinar. Please use the questions box on the sidebar of your screen, and we will answer your questions about a halfway point and also at the end of the session. This session will be recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a short feedback survey. Before I turn the stage over to Anna, let's take a couple of quick polls to help us focus the presentation around what you want to know about electric vehicles. Kel?
Sure. So we just want to know just first, right? What are you most curious about when it comes to electric vehicles, also known as EVs? So select one or more of the following, check all that apply. So are you interested in cost savings when it comes to EVs, environmental impact, the range that you can go in an EV or charging, incentives that may be happening? So just go ahead and check one or all or more or some sort of combination. And we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds, let you get all your votes in so we can kind of tailor today's presentation to those. We'll cover everything, but we'll just kind of see what you guys are most interested in. So it looks like we got about 80% of you. So if you have any last minute votes, go ahead and get that in. Otherwise, we'll close the poll. Perfect. We got 80% of you are definitely interested in the range and charging of EV vehicles. 75% are interested in cost savings. The next is incentives. And then lastly is environmental impact, but definitely over 50%. So a lot of good stuff there. We do have just one more quick poll just to start that next thing. How do you think maintenance costs compare? EV versus a gasoline car. Do you think EVs cost more than gas powered? Do they cost the same? EVs cost less than gas powered? We'll just sort of get what is your general overall sense. So again, we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds. Let everyone get their votes in. No, Anna's got a lot of good stuff to talk about this specifically in the first part of her presentation. All right, looks like everybody has their votes in, so I'm going to close the poll. And 60% of you think EVs cost less than gas powered, 25% of you think they cost the same, and 15% think EVs cost more than gas powered vehicles. So with that, I will let Anna take over from here, and she can tell you all about the things that you're most curious about and what those sort of maintenance costs, how they compare.
Welcome, Anna.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I'm really glad we did those polls because we're going to talk about a lot of those things in this presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is Anna Vanderspeck. I'm the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future, which is kind of a mouthful, but what it means is that we run a series of programs and services that help normal people, just people, make smart energy decisions. Smart in the sense of good for them and their lives, but also smart environmentally. And then we take the experience that we gain by running those programs and interacting directly in the marketplace to inform advocacy work that we do at the state and local level. So I'm here to talk about electric vehicles today. The presentation is broken roughly into 3 parts. So in the first part, I'll talk about why electric vehicles, both from a societal standpoint and a consumer standpoint. In the second part of the presentation, I'll talk about some things you should know, notably range and charging and questions that get into those details a little bit more. And in the third section, I'll talk about how to get one if you're interested. And I'll pause in between those sections to kind of gather questions from what I've just covered. But for now, I'll go ahead and jump right in. So why is Green Energy Consumers Alliance pushing for electric vehicles, and why are they just a good thing? I'll start sort of big picture and talk about societal benefits, and then transition into talking about more individual benefits. So the first thing you should know is that electric vehicles are one of the most important tools in the toolbox we have right now to fight climate change, because they're simply so much cleaner than gas-powered cars. And to illustrate that, we have some data from the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have an EV emissions tool where you can plug in any zip code in the country, and they'll show you what the emissions would be for an electric car charged up on the grid there, taking into account exactly what generators are actually hooked up to the electric grid in that region. So this is data for all of New England, basically, because New England shares one electric grid. And in New England, or really across the country, the average gas-powered car emits 381 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. The average plug-in hybrid, which is a vehicle that has a battery on board that you charge by plugging it into a wall, but also has a backup gas tank that kicks in when the battery is depleted. That plug-in hybrid will emit about 176 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven, which is about half of a gas-powered car, which is already huge. If you take one step further and go to a pure battery electric vehicle, so this is a vehicle that has a battery that you charge from a wall outlet, but no gas tank at all, you go all the way down to 96 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven, which is a reduction of more than 3/4. Which is really incredible. It's really hard to make an impact of this size anywhere else in your life. If you wanted to do this in your home, you'd have to do a ton of probably insulation work and other things, and it wouldn't just be a matter of switching out one technology the way it is with a vehicle. The other thing that I should mention here is that the numbers for the plug-in hybrid and the battery electric are just going to keep going down because our electric grid is getting cleaner and cleaner as various state laws add more renewable energy to the grid. So a couple of years ago when I was giving this presentation, the battery electric emissions were over 100 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven, and every year they come down a little bit, which is yet another reason why these are just a great choice societally. I will do one shameless plug. We have a program where you can choose local renewable energy for your electricity. If you're an Eversource or National Grid electric customer, you just enroll in the program, pay a couple extra cents per kilowatt hour, and we match your consumption with local renewable energy. So if you pair that program with a battery electric vehicle that you charge at home, you can run on no emissions at all. You can bring your emissions down to zero, which we think is pretty cool. So when we're talking about emissions, a lot of people go straight to climate change, but there are absolutely other reasons why electric vehicles are a good choice societally, and one of the huge ones is public health. So when an electric vehicle is running on electricity, there are no tailpipe emissions. And as I just mentioned, even if you take into account how the electricity that's charged that car is generated, electric cars are cleaner than gas-powered cars. And the stuff that comes out of a gas-powered car's tailpipe, we're kind of used to. We just think it's there and it dissipates. It actually causes billions of dollars of damage in health impacts every year. And I don't like to lead with the costs, but the billion is really big. But this is real people who are suffering from asthma and emphysema and are having the impacts of particulate matter, ground levels, ozone, and all the other stuff that comes out of the tailpipe impact their lungs and their hearts and their brains. So as the faster we can transition from machines that are burning fossil fuels and running around where people live and breathe to electric vehicles that don't release those pollutants, the faster we'll all get healthier. So this is another big reason why we're pushing for EVs. And the last point on this slide I should mention is that climate change, which is being caused by the release of those greenhouse gases, in and of itself is a public health threat. As the world gets warmer, diseases that are travel by mosquitoes, for example, the range where those diseases are seen is increasing because winters aren't as cold as they used to be. And there's a whole long list and a whole other presentation we could give about that, but just another thing to keep in mind from the big picture societal view. At this point, we often get the question, why? Why are electric cars so much cleaner than gas-powered cars? And the reason is they're much more efficient. So a gas-powered car actually converts only about 20% of the energy that's stored in a gallon of gasoline into motion. 80% of that energy is lost, mostly due to heat and friction, which is really quite inefficient, especially if you think about how long we've been working on internal combustion engines. You'd think that they'd be more than 20% efficient at this point. Electric vehicles, because there's just fewer moving parts and less pieces that have to rub up against each other, their efficiency is closer to 80%, which just means that more of the energy that you put into the car is actually translated into motion. So one way to think about this and compare cars on an apples to apples basis is to look at the miles per gallon and the miles per gallon electric of popular cars. And the MPGE is a measure of how far that car will go on the amount of energy that is typically stored or that is stored in 1 gallon of gasoline, which happens to be 33.7 kilowatt hours. So you can see on the right that the gas-powered cars get like somewhere between 18 and 30 miles per gallon. The cars that a lot of us typically think of as super efficient, the traditional hybrids, get somewhere between 40 and 50 miles per gallon. And then you can see on the left that anything that's got a battery is just blowing everything else out of the water in terms of efficiency. So let's look at the Hyundai Kona EV has the equivalent of 120 miles per gallon. That's how efficient it is. So this efficiency gain is what's driving the public health and environmental benefits that I just mentioned, but it also drives a lot of the consumer benefits that we see. So drilling down from big picture down to the individual, the first thing you should know is that it's cheaper to drive a mile on electricity than it is to drive a mile on gas. There are a couple of different ways of looking at this, and we'll talk about both here. So on the left, you can see that we at Green Energy Consumers just do some math. Every quarter, we look at current gas prices, current electricity prices in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and how much people generally drive. And we do some math to try and calculate exactly how much you would save by switching from the average gas-powered car to the average electric car. And the last time we did that, the savings were about 3.6 cents per mile, which amounted to about $40 per month or $428 per year. This is pretty cool, but it's also really worth highlighting that New England, compared to the rest of the country, has pretty high electricity prices. And right now, gas prices are pretty low. So the fact that you can see those savings even in this environment just really points to the strength of those efficiency gains. On the right, you'll see a screenshot that I took this morning from a website maintained by the Federal Department of Energy. It's called the eGallon. And basically every day they post the average gas price by state, and they calculate something called the electric eGallon, which is saying how much would you have to pay in electricity in that state to drive the same distance that a gallon of gasoline would get you. So you can see that right now in Massachusetts, the average gas price is $2.21, and the electric eGallon is under $2. So that's another way of kind of trying to get at the same issue of lower fuel costs. If you're interested, you can go to our Green Energy Consumers website and you can see the methodology of how we did our math. And if you want to dive into that for the eGallon, they have that listed on their website too. But this is absolutely supported by all the experience we have talking to electric vehicle drivers and asking them what they love about their cars. So maintenance is the other piece of this in terms of financial benefits to EV drivers. And most of you were right in that poll at the beginning. Maintenance for electric vehicles is absolutely less than maintenance for gas-powered cars. Consumer Reports just released a really awesome study where they looked at thousands of actual EVs owned by actual people and did some analysis on what those fuel and maintenance costs actually looked like. And they found that the maintenance and repair costs for an electric vehicle are about half that of a gas-powered car over the life of the vehicle. The reason for that is that there are just far fewer moving parts in an electric vehicle, which means that there's fewer things that can break or corrode or rust or otherwise need replacement. And the battery, the motor, and the electronics themselves require little maintenance. It's basically a computer on wheels that goes forward and backwards. So it's just a simpler machine. We get a lot of questions about, do I need to replace the battery or do I need to worry about the battery? The answer is no. The battery is covered by warranty usually for 100,000 miles or 8 years. The data sets that are available right now show that the batteries are performing really well. And a couple manufacturers have announced that they're really close to having a 1,000,000-mile battery, a battery that will basically far outlast the life of the vehicle itself. And then finally, on the maintenance side, you should know that there are technologies built right into the car to protect the parts that do have to do work. And one of the best examples of this is regenerative braking. So when you're driving an electric vehicle and you take your foot off of the accelerator, if you have the regen option on, the car will recognize that you want to slow down and slow the car down faster than just normal friction on the road or momentum would do. And what it's doing there is it's capturing energy that would be lost if you actually use the friction brakes with some fancy magnets and some fancy science, and putting that right back into the battery. So you've got a double benefit of A, it extends your range, and B, it protects your brakes. So you don't even have to replace your brake pads as often as you would in a gas-powered car. So I just threw a lot at you, and this is a kind of a simplified total cost of ownership table to compare or really tie together all the things that we just talked about. So I have on here 2 electric vehicles on the left. So the Nissan Leaf Plus and the Chevy Bolt are 2 of the more popular EVs that are out there right now. And on the right is the Toyota RAV4, just not the electric version, just the normal version. And what we're comparing here is the purchase price or the upfront cost, the fuel costs over 5 years, and the maintenance costs over 5 years. So first thing I want to draw your attention to is that if you're just looking at the MSRP, the Nissan Leaf Plus and the Chevy Bolt look a lot more expensive than the Toyota RAV4. But when you take into account the various state and other incentives that are available, the cost comes down right from the get-go, and we'll talk more about that in the second part of this presentation. But then we did some math to find the annual fuel costs. We used data from the Consumer Reports study to find maintenance costs. And basically in every one of those lines of this chart, you can see that the EV wins out. And after 5 years, the difference is on the order of thousands of dollars. So we definitely encourage you to go look at that Consumer Report study in more detail. It talks both about fuel savings and maintenance savings and has more specifics about certain vehicles if you're looking for one over the other. But overall, this principle holds true across the cars. One very quick plug that we'll go through in more detail in the second half is that the numbers for the EV come down even further if you're a Massachusetts resident, because there's a special state rebate that you can take advantage of, but we'll get to that in a moment. One finding that we really wanted to pull out of that Consumer Reports study is that basically what Consumer Reports did was they looked at vehicles by class and tried to find what was the most effective, cost-effective vehicle by class. And within every class, it was always an electric vehicle that won out. And they, in their study, were obviously more detailed than we were in our little total cost of ownership analysis, because they did include things like financing, depreciation, resale, all that. So the chart on the left is the lifetime savings you can expect by choosing that electric vehicle compared to a gas-powered vehicle in its class. And you can see, again, that the savings are in the order of thousands of dollars. They vary a little bit depending on which car you choose. One quick caveat is that those savings are based on a national average for electricity prices. So the savings will be slightly lower in New England because our electricity prices are a little higher, but they'll still be on the order of thousands of dollars. And this is just a really great resource, especially if you want to think about buying a new versus a used EV. They break down the savings on a 5-year basis, the first 5 years of the vehicle's life versus the full lifetime. So that's definitely an excellent resource that I would point everybody to. And then last but not least, EVs are really fun to drive. I say this as a person who does not really care about cars, despite running the program that talks all about them. But we have helped almost 1,000 people get into EVs over the years, and we regularly survey them, asking them what they think about their car. And so far, every time we've issued a survey, 100% have said that they would recommend their car to a friend or neighbor. They are really quiet, they accelerate really quickly, the torque is really incredible, and once you've driven in one and experienced how smooth of a ride that is, it's really hard to go back to a gas-powered car after that. So if you haven't had a chance to sit in an electric car, drive one, I would definitely recommend you do. Whenever we get out of COVID, there will be plenty of test drive events where you can come and check some cars out. And also talk to real EV owners to learn what their experience has been. So with that, we've reached our first pause point, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or I think we have another poll, but I'll turn it back to Kelly.
So I'll
Sophia,
take it.
yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Yes, Sophia. So we do have a couple of questions. The first question is around, I'm going to say size. So I hope that hope that we answer the question from the person that put it in the question box. Is there a place to like compare different size of the EV vehicles? Because a lot of people like to drive SUVs. They like, you know, the largeness, the space that it offers. So what is your take on that?
So as was mentioned at the beginning, Green Energy Consumers, we run a program called Drive Green, which the first part of is education. So if you want to learn anything about EVs, you can come to our website and learn about that, or talk to us. We're real people, and we will answer your questions. But the second part is that we've built up basically an online shopping tool. So we have a website where you can click Explore and Shop. It'll show you all of the EVs that are generally available in the market in New England, and you can sort and filter by different characteristics. So if you're looking specifically for an SUV, you can check off the SUV button, and we'll show you what the SUV options are, broken out by, is it a pure battery electric or is it a plug-in hybrid? You can compare the MSRP, the state rebate, the federal tax credit. You can look at all of that and sort of narrow down your choices. And then when you're ready to test drive, we can connect you with a local dealer who's also probably offering a discount on that car. So that I'll show you actually that website in the third part of the presentation. But basically, yes, there are SUV options. There's even more coming. And there's a handy dandy resource available for you to check out the options.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, another one is, can I drive my EV in the New England winter storm weather?
Yes, you can. So we get this question a lot because people are very concerned about it, understandably. What I tend to say as a quick answer is that the country with the highest EV adoption rate in the world is Norway, and it's very cold in Norway and very snowy and very mountainy, and if they can do it, we can do it too. EVs do, I mean, all vehicles actually perform differently when it's cold and snowy than when it's nice and sunny. So the battery does get a little bit less efficient when it's cold because batteries don't want to be at temperature extremes. So you will see some of those impacts if you're driving an EV. There's definitely easy things you can do to mitigate them a little bit. The best thing is to just plug your car in overnight and maybe even tell it to warm itself up before you start driving somewhere. It's better for you and for your car. But in terms of temperature, you'll see some of those impacts. In terms of snow and handling, most of these vehicles are built using what's called a skateboard design, where basically the battery, instead of being in the trunk or in the front, is the base of the vehicle between the wheels. And what that means is that the battery has a really, the vehicle has a low center of gravity, which means it handles quite well. So you can absolutely drive your EV in winter weather in New England. And there are also some vehicles with all-wheel drive available, more coming, and that's another thing you can sort and filter by on our website.
Oh, that's great. We do have a few more questions coming in. We love it.
Mm-hmm.
So who's at the top of the EV maker?
Yeah, so Tesla is the name that everybody thinks of first with EVs, and on a certain level, rightfully so. They have blazed the trail that the other automakers are trying to like scramble behind and catch up. So Tesla makes really excellent cars. Some of them are maybe even almost affordable, but they are full of all these features and over-the-air updates, and they're great. So if you want a Tesla, go get a Tesla. More power to you. We can help direct you to the website, but Tesla has declined to officially participate in our program, which is totally fine. So Tesla is definitely up there. However, a lot of manufacturers are making really excellent EVs that people would not necessarily think of immediately. So GM and Chevrolet are doing really well. They have the Chevy Bolt, which is an all-electric car that gets almost 260 miles of range per charge. It's been performing really well. GM has a vision. I was actually just before this presentation watching some of their really snazzy videos about the electric Hummer that's coming and some of their luxury cars that are coming, but they do have a vision for electrifying the future, and the Bolt, I think, was it was not their first, but their first really big foray into this field, and the Bolt is one of the more popular cars in our program, rightfully so, and people love it.
Okay.
But there are tons of other, and I could talk about them forever, but in the interest of time, I'll just say there's lots of them. Check out the website.
Okay, all right. And for those that are asking, we will put the link into the chat as well as display it on the last page of the presentation. So we do have another question about maintenance. What are standard maintenance requirements? For example, oil change.
So the answer to this question differs if we're talking about a pure battery electric vehicle versus a plug-in hybrid. So a plug-in hybrid, because it does still have an internal combustion engine, it will still have sort of the same maintenance requirements. They'll just be less frequent because the engine is used less frequently because sometimes the battery is being used. For a pure battery electric car, we've had people look at the maintenance schedule and kind of laugh because it's like, rotate the tires, check the computer, and that's basically it. There are no oil changes on a pure battery electric car. You might have to change the wiper fluid every now and then, but I would encourage you to just go look at some of the manuals from the manufacturers and check out the maintenance schedule, because it's almost laughable, but it's not. Because it's just really cool. But I will say that Green Energy Consumers, in addition to these EV 101 webinars, does deep dives into certain topics. And we just recently did a deep dive into EV maintenance. So we have a whole hour-long webinar dedicated to that, and we have the recording available on our website. So I can send you that link also for a follow-up email. That's a good one. We have a library of past webinars, and one of them is on that.
Okay. Just a couple of more and then we'll move on. Does the New England power grid have the capacity to handle new demand from EVs?
Oh, this is a good question. Yes, it does. So the beauty of electric vehicles, and we're going to stray a little bit into my advocacy hat now, and I hope that's okay, is that the when you charge does not matter that much. So cars spend most of the time sitting somewhere, which is great for EVs because they can use that time to charge. But what that means is they're actually a great resource for the electric grid, because electricity demand and supply are not flat throughout the day. they peak when everybody comes home and turns on the microwave and the TV and their computer, but their electricity demand is really quite low at night, which is a great time for EVs to charge. So one thing that our utilities are starting to think about, and other utilities in other parts of the country have already implemented, is something called time of use rates, or active demand management, where basically you, the consumer, will be incentivized to charge when demand is low, because it's better for the system to smooth out demand and supply. So there's basically plenty of space for EV charging to happen, because there are times of the day when nobody's really using electricity, when you can get a lower electricity rate basically for those hours, and you benefit, the grid benefits, and even people who don't own electric vehicles benefit, because the fixed costs of maintaining the system are spread out across more kilowatt hours. So it's that kind of arrangement is just a win-win-win for everybody, and that's something that we expect to see as electric vehicles increase in adoption.
Okay, great. And how much does it cost to put a charger at your house, and what if you move? Now, is this something that you're going to cover in the next section? If so, then we can address it.
That's a great segue into the next section. But if I can't remember now already, I'm sorry if there are poll questions that need to be asked. I can just put a pin in that and come back to that in the next section.
Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
I have one more, and then we'll let Kelly do the poll. I share my apartment and utilities with roommates. If I were to get an EV, are there any tools or methods to calculate how much electricity and cost my EV is actually using, so that I can appropriately not charge my roommates?
Yes. So I'll do a sort of very quick response to this, and then maybe come back to it after we talk a little bit more about how charging works. But long story short, there are a couple things you can do. You can either, if you have a garage and you want to install like a faster charger, that charger can be a smart charger and tell you exactly how many kilowatt hours it's drawing. So you can basically look at the data report from that charger and do the math and pay your roommates back. Some of the cars also have that feature just built into the car. That is not something I have memorized in my head, but a lot of them will tell you, like, you charged from this time to this time, and we added this many miles because we took in this many kilowatt hours. So there are definitely ways to do that.
Okay, all right. So Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you for the polls. Now, there are, Anna, a couple of comments in there, very, very good comments that hopefully we can get to, of how people are enjoying your presentation so far.
Cool.
Oh yeah, we've definitely hit the marker on like SUVs. People definitely like the regenerative braking. There's a couple questions about incentives that I know you're going to cover in the next section, so we'll talk about that. We'll get to that after the Q&A. But our first just question is, have you ever been in an electric vehicle? How many of you guys have ever driven or been in an EV? So yeah, you guys are all over the polls now. So we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds or until we get 100% of the vote. But all right. Seems like everybody's almost gotten their votes in. Just give it a few more seconds. All right. Go ahead and close this poll out, and it looks like we're about a 50-50 split, maybe 60-40. We got 57% that have said yes, they've been in an electric vehicle or driven one, and then 43% have not yet. So just as our last poll, just so that Anna can kind of talk about the incentives, we're just curious, and this is totally optional, you don't have to answer, what states, where do you live? So for a state EV incentives, so we have an idea of where everyone's coming from. Again, we'll leave this open for about 20 more seconds or so. And it looks like we got a lot of our votes in, so go ahead and close this out here shortly. Okay. So it looks like we have about 70% of you are in Massachusetts. We have some New Hampshire people, some people from Rhode Island, and then some of you guys that are outside of that. So, with the pandemic going on, everyone's kind of all over the place. But go ahead and hide these results and take it away, Anna.
Okay, great. So I will jump right into the section about things you should know, which will talk about charging and incentives, among other things. So The first thing you should know is that range anxiety is a thing of the past. And range anxiety is a term for the fear that you're going to get in your electric car and you're going to suddenly be stranded on the side of the highway because you've run out of charge. And there are a couple of reasons why basically once people get into an electric car, that fear dissipates really quickly. The first is that the manufacturers know that this is your worst fear, so they've invested really heavily into really sophisticated battery management software. And when you get in an EV, on the front display, it will basically at all times tell you exactly how many miles of range you have left. So you're never suddenly going to realize that you have only 5 miles of range left, because at all times it's telling you how many miles you have left. And it's usually giving you a range, like a high estimate, a low estimate, and a medium. And some of these cars are so sophisticated that they're taking into account things like how you drive. If the car has learned that you are a really aggressive driver who slams on the accelerator and then slams on the brakes a lot, it will say, okay, you're a little bit less efficient of a driver, so I'm going to adjust your miles down. And it will also often take into account the temperature. So if it's really, really cold or really, really hot, one of those places where batteries don't like to be, it'll adjust the estimates down. But if it's 60 degrees and sunny, it'll adjust the estimates up because the battery is really happy. So that's the first thing you should know. The second is that the range of the vehicles that are available today far surpasses what most people drive in a day. So most people in Massachusetts or New England, roughly, I would say, drive somewhere between 30 and 50 miles per day. Most of the all-electric vehicles that are available today that consumers are really gravitating towards have more than 200 miles of range per charge. So that means you can do your daily driving. If you can charge at home, then you can charge overnight, or you can go to a fast charger in a public location or charge at work if you're lucky enough to have charging available there, and basically recoup what you've used during the day. But definitely understandable that some people are still nervous about going all the way to an all-electric vehicle right off the bat, or some people drive hundreds of miles every day and don't always have access to charging. So here we want to point out that there are great plug-in hybrids available. So again, those are the vehicles that have that backup gas tank that you can use if you need it. And so this is just a sort of a smattering of the vehicles that are available. There are more, which you can see on our website, but really the point I want to drive home is there is probably a car that is perfect for you, or that will absolutely serve your needs, and you're not going to get stuck on the side of a highway and get eaten by a bear. Charging is definitely one of the things that people have the most questions about, but it's not as hard or as confusing as I think people fear. So there are 3 basic levels of charging. Level 1 is when you take the cord that comes with the car and you plug it into a normal outlet, the same kind of outlet you would plug your cell phone into. And that will add about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging. So that sounds pretty slow, and level 1 is also called the trickle charge because it's the slowest of the options. But it's actually enough for a lot of people. So when we have surveyed folks who've gotten cars through our program, about 40% just stick with this kind of charging because it's enough for them. If you drive 40 miles in a day, you come home and overnight for 10 hours you plug in your car, that'll recoup those 40 miles while you're sleeping and having dinner and doing other things. Some people do want a faster level of charging, and the next level up is called level 2. Basically, it uses a 220 volt outlet, which is the same kind of outlet that you would use for an electric dryer or a washing machine. And it adds anywhere from 10 to 25 miles of range per hour spent charging. And that range depends on the car because some cars can just accept electricity faster than others. So if you have seen charging stations around at a library or a town hall or something like that, it's probably a level 2 charging station. But you can also install these at your home. Again, you just need a 220 volt outlet. Then you can buy a unit either online or at a home improvement store, and just have an electrician hook it up, and then you can charge faster at home. The 3rd level of charging is called DC fast charging, and DC in this case stands for direct current. Basically, it means that you are bypassing the onboard charger on the car to put electricity directly into the battery and DC instead of AC current. And this is the closest that we can get to the experience of pulling up to a gas station and filling up real quick. So the speed at which you can DC fast charge depends on the car and what station you're on. But a Chevy Bolt, for example, the car I mentioned earlier, can add about 90 miles of range in 30 minutes. So DC fast charging stations are popping up along highway corridors, at rest stations, and they're really something that you would use when you're going on a road trip and while you're stopping to get a snack and use the restroom or something like that. In terms of plug types, it gets a little bit complicated, but not too bad. So the first thing you should know is that Tesla has its own proprietary charging system. You may have heard about their supercharger network. They have invested a ton of money into basically blanketing the country in charging stations so that if you live in California, you can drive to Massachusetts in your Tesla, and it's totally fine because there are charging stations along the way. But they've done that in part because they have their own proprietary port. So only a Tesla vehicle can plug into a Tesla charging station. Everybody else uses the same standards. So for level 1 and level 2 charging, all the other manufacturers use the J1772 port, which is, I don't know why it's called that, but it's in the top right-hand corner. So it doesn't matter if you're driving a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Bolt or what have you, that's the plug type, and you don't need to worry about whether your car is going to match the plug or not. For DC fast charging, it gets slightly more complicated in that there are two standards. So American and European manufacturers use the J1772 combo, which you'll see on the right. It's basically the exact same thing as the thing above, but has those two extra sort of prongs right underneath. So the Chevy Bolt, for example, uses that. The Ford vehicles use that, and most of the vehicles that are being bought and driven in this area use that for DC fast charging. Asian manufacturers use a different standard called the CHAdeMO, which is on the bottom right, and you can see that it looks very different from the J1772 combo. So if you're driving a Nissan Leaf, for example, if you want a DC fast charge, you need to use the CHAdeMO plug because the physical plug you have won't plug into the car if you're using a J1772. The good news is most DC fast charging stations have a cord for both type. So you don't really need to worry about it too much. The only time I would say that you need to think about it is if you are relying on some road trip on a DC fast charging station that a car dealership has installed. They've probably only installed the kind for the cars that they sell. But all of the public ones that you see, Electrify America is one of the network operators that's building them out across the country. They always have CHAdeMO and J1772 combos available, so you don't need to worry about it too much. So there was a question about installing a charging unit at home. You can just use a level 1 charge by plugging into a normal wall socket and getting about 4 miles of range per hour spent driving. Sorry, per hour spent charging. But if you do want to install a level 2 charging station, we have written a guide to help you figure out how much that might cost, because the costs do vary a lot. If you live in a home that you have a level 2 or a 220 volt outlet like in your garage or near your driveway already, it's not going to be expensive. You buy a unit, which depending on how many bells and whistles you want is a couple $100, upwards of $1,000 if you want it to be super Wi-Fi enabled and smart and do all sorts of fancy things. And then you just hook it up. But if you need to pull a new 220 volt line through your house, it'll be a little bit more expensive. But the guide that we wrote is intended both to help people who are like, I really want to get an electric vehicle and I need to know what questions to ask my electrician when I ask them to do this job. It's useful for those folks, but it's also useful for people who are like, can I even get an electric car? Like, what are the questions I need to ask and things I need to figure out about how I drive, what kind of a car I might want to get to figure out what I need for charging. So that's available on our website. I definitely recommend that as a resource. And as I mentioned earlier, in our deep dives, we also have a deep dive into charging. So if you want to spend a whole hour learning about charging, we've got a webinar recording for you. So not everybody can charge at home, or not everybody wants to charge at home all the time. There's a lot more public charging out there than most people realize. These are screenshots from a website called PlugShare, which we highly recommend because it's crowdsourced and it's platform neutral. So basically the way that public charging works is that a lot of cities and towns and businesses have decided to install charging either as a service or as something to meet their climate goals, or as something to draw more customers to them and keep them there longer. So all of these various site hosts can install different types of charging stations. So they can either install what's called a dumb charger, which basically is just a fancy outlet, really. You can plug in and you don't have to pay, and it just exists. A lot of them have decided to go with charging network operators. So there are different companies that have really expanded in the past couple of years who operate networks of charging stations. So you can go onto their app and find all of their charging stations and figure out how much they cost and where they are and all that. But they're still kind of competing with each other. So we like PlugShare because it puts all of those stations on the same map. So in these screenshots, anything that is green is a level 2 charging station. Anything that is orange is a DC fast charging station. The great thing about PlugShare, both the app and the website, is that you can plug in any address and basically figure out what charging stations are nearby. But if you click on one of these markers, you can learn more about that specific station. So you can learn how much it costs, what's nearby. You can see all the lovely EV enthusiasts who have checked in and said, I charged on, I don't know, January 4th and it was great, and there's a Starbucks nearby. And you can also see photos because sometimes there will be a charging station at like a Walmart or a supermarket or some sort, and you get there and the parking lot is massive and you don't know exactly where it is. This app was great because it'll tell you which corner of the parking lot to go to and things like that. So these are some screenshots. This is unfortunately one of those websites where as you zoom in, more pops up. So I'm sure that there are stations here that exist that you just don't see because of the zoom level, but I definitely encourage you to go check it out. I have mostly screenshots from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but there are definitely charging stations in New Hampshire and Connecticut too. And I would say just go play around with the website yourself. It also has a trip planning feature. So if you want to figure out how do I get from here to go visit somebody 400 miles away, it'll show you which charging stations are along your route. So with that, I'll transition from charging to incentives. So first thing you should know is that there's a federal tax credit for EVs. So if you purchase an electric vehicle, you can basically file this form when you file your taxes and you'll get a tax credit. It's up to $7,500. And I say up to for two reasons. So first, it depends on the battery size of the car. So the bigger the battery, the bigger the federal tax credit. So some of the plug-in hybrids, for example, that have slightly smaller batteries have a federal tax credit of like $4,500 or something less. Secondly, it also depends on your federal tax liability. So if you purchase a car that qualifies for the full $7,500 federal tax credit, but you don't owe $7,500 in federal taxes that year, you can't carry over the difference from one year to the next, and the IRS will unfortunately not write you a check. So that's one thing to be aware of. One thing that's worth noting is that if you lease a car, the federal tax credit goes to the leasing agent, basically the dealer's bank, and most of them will pass the value of that on to you in the form of lower monthly payments. So for some folks, that's a really good option to capture that value if you can't capture it directly. And the last thing you should know about the federal tax credit is that it was set up to jumpstart the industry. So the way it was set up, once a manufacturer had sold 200,000 units in the US, it starts phasing out. So far, Tesla and General Motors have completed that phase out, so there's no more federal tax credit for those. So far, none of the other manufacturers are really close to hitting that 200,000 unit mark yet, although Toyota and Nissan are kind of like racing for third place. This is one thing that we will be watching really closely over the next couple of months, because it would not surprise me if the new Biden administration tries to reinvigorate this federal tax credit, particularly since the two manufacturers that are effectively being penalized for taking action the fastest are both American. So that's one thing to watch over the next year for sure. Then if you are a Massachusetts resident, you qualify for the state rebate. It's called the More EV rebate. Basically, if you purchase or lease an electric vehicle, you go to moreev.org, you fill out a form, and the state sends you a check in the mail. So for a pure battery electric vehicle, the amount is $2,500. For a plug-in hybrid, the amount is $1,500 as long as it has at least 25 miles of electric range. And then the final vehicle purchase price has to be under $50,000 to qualify for that state rebate. And then the third level of discount is our Drive Green program. So as I mentioned, at Green Energy Consumers, we have built up a network of car dealers who offer fixed discounts to program participants on a monthly basis. So every month you can come and you can narrow down your choices, which cars you might be interested in, and then see what local dealers are offering what local deals. And as long as you sign up through the form on our website, you qualify for those deals. So I will very quickly just pull that up to show you. So this is greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. You can come here and learn more about all of those topics we just talked about. So if you want to learn more about charging and find our guide, you can click on charging and driving, read testimonials, things like that. But basically, when you're ready to purchase or lease, you click Explore and Shop. You go to our shopping portal. You can choose new or pre-owned for now, and for the sake of time, I'll just check off new. And then this is that form that I mentioned where you can see all of the cars that currently are generally available in New England. You can learn some fast facts like range and efficiency and state and federal incentives. On the left here, you can sort and filter by different characteristics, but basically when you're ready, you can check off a car, hit next, decide what trim level you want, which is basically what packages you want, and then you can see deals from local dealers. So right now we have some really crazy discounts. So each of our dealers basically posts what they're willing to offer that month for the Drive Green discount. So this dealer in Rhode Island is offering $16,000 off, which is just insane. But then we do the math for you and show you the state rebate, the federal tax credit, and the final price. We put as many details in this sort of posting as we can squeeze out of the car dealers. But basically you can come through, you can say, okay, I'm interested in this one, but I actually live in, I don't know, Quincy, so Cork is interesting to me. And then you complete the sign up form. And when you hit finish up, we connect you directly with the salespeople at the dealership who actually know about electric vehicles and also know about the program. So our hope is that it's a smoother car buying process than it would otherwise be. So with that, I'll just leave this last slide, which is we'd love for you to get involved. If you want to learn more, you can either go straight and sign up to test drive if you're itching to get an electric car. But if you're not quite ready yet and you want to take some initial steps first, we have a community page on Facebook where you can talk to real EV drivers. You can join and ask a question, and somebody who's a real person who owns a Hyundai Kona EV or whatever it is will respond. Or you can take a pledge that your next car, whenever you get your next car, will be electric, and we'll keep in touch with you with market developments and new cars coming out and things you should know. So that's it. I hope we still have some time for questions, but thank you for sitting through a whole hour with me, and I hope you had a good time.
Well, thank you, Anna. We do have some questions. How are they able to fund these discounts?
That's a great question. So a lot of it is, first of all, we don't have direct insight into that on a month-to-month basis. So our organization has an agreement with these dealers that says, you will post these prices, basically you will not lie. Like the discounts that you post on our website are real. You actually have cars in stock, and you actually have people who know how to talk about them. What most of the dealers do is they combine pricing programs from the manufacturer level with some sort of internal bucket of money that they have as well. So when you go to the website, for example, there's one box called financing requirement. So some of the dealers, to offer these really great deals, they're taking advantage of some pricing program for the manufacturer that requires that you finance through like GM Financial or Nissan's bank. We put all that up front so that you can see what you're getting yourself into, but it's usually a combination of that sort of manufacturer bucket of money and the dealer bucket of money.
Okay. So we are running short on time. What a wonderful presentation, Anna. This was absolutely great. Again, people are saying that I live in northern Massachusetts. I've been driving for about 8 years with an EV vehicle, have had no issues in the winter time. So they like that. There is one that I wanted to get in. The person says, I'm officially employed by Cell Press in Massachusetts, but I now work from home in New Mexico. I'm wondering if you know of an organization near me that's like the Green Energy Consumers Alliance. Are there groups doing the same things in other states?
So that is a great question. We're not the first people to do this. I should have maybe clarified that. So in 2015 and 2016, there were some group buy programs for electric vehicles, mostly in the West, actually, so mostly in Colorado and Utah, that we learned from and studied to create this program. I don't know if there's anything like us out there right now. A lot of the programs that did exist were time limited and like very specific to one dealership. So it was like a 4-month program with a specific Nissan dealership, and you could get like $10,000 off the Nissan Leaf. What's changed in that time is there's so many more options. So that's one of the strengths of our program, I think, is that we try and show you all of the options. I would just Google. I'm sorry, that's the best advice I have, but like Google cars in New Mexico. I don't know if New Mexico has a state rebate, or even if it's one of the ZEV states. There are certain states that have set goals about electric vehicle adoption, but you are closer to California, and California has all the cool EVs. So maybe if there's nothing in New Mexico, as if you could hop over to California right now. But basically, I don't have specifics, but I hope you can find something.
Okay, all right. So there's an overwhelming request for a copy of your presentation, and hopefully we can work with you to make sure everyone can get a copy of the presentation. And if we weren't able to answer your questions or ask your questions, we will put it in the response email. We will answer, all the questions that we didn't get to, because we are running short of time. And we do want to be aware of everyone's time here. So I will turn it back over to you, Julie. Thank you again, Anna.
My pleasure.
And thanks for all the questions too.
Excellent. That was so informative. That was so great. Thank you so much, Anna and Green Alliance. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Julie Quinn. I'm from Transaction. If you do have any questions about what we provide at Transaction, you can reply to the email that you received, and one of our transportation specialists or TMA directors will get in touch with you. For additional EV questions, Anna's contact information is listed on the current screen, and it will also be in the follow-up email. Remember, you can also check eCommuter for the most updated EV fuel finder locations. Our next transportation webinar, Quick and Easy Fitness Resolutions you can do during your commute, is scheduled for January 28th at noon. So please watch your email for additional information on how to register for this webinar and other webinars that we do have scheduled. So again, Anna, thank you. That was great information. Have a great afternoon and almost the weekend. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.